It had been 6 weeks since Ethan first said the words business trip with that careful pause. 6 weeks since his suitcase thudded down the stairs while he avoided my eyes. 6 weeks since the brass key on my kitchen hook, my little motif of order, began feeling like the only stable thing left in the house. And that morning, as I stood in line at the Willow Bend market with a carton of blueberries in my hand, everything collapsed in a single instant. Because on the overhead TV, playing a silent loop of local footage, I saw Ethan stepping into a downtown hotel lobby, time-stamped for a night he claimed he was in Denver. In that instant, I understood the core betrayal. He assumed I'd never check a single detail he gave me. He assumed I'd stay soft, stay silent, stay predictable. The scene froze me in place. The clerk behind me cleared her throat, asking if I was still in line. I nodded automatically, paid, walked out to my car, and sat there with the groceries cooling at my feet while the truth settled like dust. Ethan had convinced himself that I was too busy, too trusting, too invested in keeping our home calm to ever verify anything he said. He was wrong. Backfill came in sharp flashes as I drove home, small, forgettable moments that suddenly weren't so forgettable. The strange perfume on his jacket 5 weeks ago, which he brushed off as a client's wife hugging him. The way he snapped when I asked which airline he'd flown. The new habit of leaving his phone face down even when it wasn't buzzing. And of course, the laughter, little bursts on the phone at night, followed by just talking with Mark, although Mark, his business partner, never laughed like that. But I also remembered something else. I had found a lease addendum in our home safe back in March. A boring, dense page about tenant rights and property ID numbers, nothing special. But the line I remembered now, with clarity, referenced mandatory registration of overnight guests. At the time, I'd rolled my eyes at how nitpicky our HOA could be. Now I felt a seed, an idea forming. When I got home, I deliberately hung my brass key on its hook. I wanted something grounding as I opened my laptop and navigated to the hotel's website. I clicked through to the lobby camera page, public because the hotel bragged about visible security as customer reassurance. I scrubbed through old footage. And there it was again, Ethan, at 7:42 p.m., walking beside a woman in a sea blue scarf. I only watched 10 seconds. That was enough. I didn't need the full movie, the still frame already told the truth. Later that afternoon, I went to my office, my consulting firm on Elm Street, and closed the door. My assistant, Janelle, peeked in to ask if everything was all right. I said yes. It wasn't a lie, it was preparation. I called the HOA office and made the conversation sound casual. I'm reviewing our property documents. Could you send me the updated bylaws? Especially the guest residency clauses? The clerk emailed them within minutes. Back in the present scene, I heard Ethan's car pull into the driveway at nearly 7. He'd told me he'd be flying in late tonight. Instead, he walked in laughing, actually laughing, like a man who had rehearsed a joyful entrance. He dropped his suitcase, brushed snow from his shoulders, and said, "You won't believe the flight, some baby was." But then he stopped. Because I was sitting at the dining table with my laptop open, the HOA document displayed, and a still frame of him and the woman in the sea blue scarf frozen beside it. He stared at the screen, then at me. The laughter died so abruptly it was almost cinematic. What is that?" "A timestamp," I said softly. "Yours." He swallowed hard. This isn't what it looks like." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply reached over, lifted the brass key from the table, using it as a pointer, and tapped the hotel footage. "You assumed I'd never check." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he tried the familiar excuses, networking dinners, client emergency, someone needing a ride, but each sentence sagged under its own weight. He wasn't prepared for proof. He never thought I'd gather any. Before he could regroup, my phone buzzed. It was the HOA clerk returning my earlier call, asking if I still needed assistance with guest registration violations. I stepped into the hall, keeping the conversation short and neutral, telling her I'd follow up tomorrow. When I returned, Ethan looked shaken. The momentum had shifted. He knew it. I knew it. We'll talk tomorrow, I said. Tonight, you can sleep in the guest room. He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. He walked slowly down the hall, leaving his suitcase by the door. For the first time in 6 weeks, I felt calm, not because the hurt was gone, but because clarity had finally replaced confusion. And I knew exactly what I needed to do next. Ethan left the kitchen lights on that morning the way he always did when he was nervous, bright, unnecessary, almost interrogative. I walked past them without a word. It had been 10 hours since he'd seen the hotel footage. 10 hours since he'd slept in the guest room. 10 hours since the quiet between us had shifted from confusion to consequence. And as I stepped into the cold air of our driveway, the brass key in my pocket felt heavier than it ever had. I drove straight to the HOA office on Brookline Avenue, choosing to start my day inside a decisive scene rather than another round of arguments at home. The receptionist, a thin woman named Molly with tired eyes, looked up when I approached the desk. "You called yesterday about guest residency clause 4B, she asked. "Yes," I said. "I need the full enforcement file. The one with the timestamp entry logs." Her eyebrows twitched. "That's normally for disputes, are you in one?" "Not yet," I said. "But I want to be prepared." She printed the documents and slid them across the counter. The pages crackled, each one dense with dates, property ID numbers, and a small, plain sentence I'd noticed in the March addendum: "Unregistered overnight guests constitute a Class C violation, subject to fines and suspension of household privileges." Backfill came as I sat in my car staring at the papers. In April, Ethan had pushed me to sign a renewal on our HOA membership dues, insisting it kept property values high. He'd rushed it, too, hovering at my shoulder while I initialed page after page. I remembered teasing him for his sudden obsession with fine print. Now I understood why he had been so attentive. He thought he knew every rule I'd never bother reading. But he had forgotten one thing: I am a consultant. My job is literally to read what people overlook. I flipped to the last page again. Clause 4B. Fines for unregistered guests. Multiple violations escalating consequences. And each violation tied to the homeowner of record. Which was not me. It was him. I let the information settle before returning to the present. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, Janelle, from my office. I answered. "Hey, boss," she said. "Quick question. The file you asked me to pull, the one with the 2023 property deed? The scanned copy has 2 versions." My pulse tightened. 2 versions? One with your signatures. One without. The unsigned one looks edited? There are faint crop marks. Ethan had forgotten I have a digital archive of everything in that office. "Send both to my private email," I said. "And Janelle? Don't mention this to anyone." "Of course." I hung up and waited for the email. When it arrived, I opened the attachments. The difference was small but damning: a single clause missing in the second version. The clause confirming joint authorization for any lease or guest arrangement beyond 30 days. He'd tried to create a version that excluded me. He assumed I'd never look at the original again. I drove back home, the documents on the passenger seat and a new understanding crystallizing in my chest. Ethan was in the kitchen, staring at his coffee like it held answers. When he heard the door, he straightened. "Maya, can we talk?" His voice was softer than last night, but not calmer. More strategic. He still thought he could negotiate his way back to control. I placed the HOA documents on the island. "We can talk, but it won't be like before." He looked at the papers. "What is all this supposed to be?" "Proof," I said. "That your story about Denver doesn't match the timestamped hotel footage. Proof that your business trips violate the HOA residency clause you insisted I sign. And proof," I added, sliding my tablet across the counter, "that you kept an edited deed in your files." His jaw clenched. "There is an explanation." "There always is," I said. But explanations aren't what I'm collecting. His eyes flicked to the tablet, then to me, then back. Maya, are you planning something? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my pocket and placed the brass key gently on the counter between us. It glinted under the kitchen lights. You assumed, I said quietly, that I'd never verify. That I'd never read. That I'd never notice timestamps or edits or versions. He took a breath, trying to reassemble himself. Look, the woman in the video is a colleague. We met to discuss a contract. At a hotel, at night, with no record of you leaving until morning, I said. And the scarf she wore? The sea blue scarf? I found one in your trunk last week. Still had the store tag. His face drained. That's not, Maya, you're jumping to conclusions. No, I replied, voice steady. I'm following evidence. Before he could protest, the doorbell rang. I stepped past him to answer it. A delivery driver stood on the porch holding a packet, a certified envelope addressed to Ethan. He signed for it and handed it to me before I could object. Ethan hovered in the doorway. What is that? I handed it to him. Open it. He tore the seal and froze. The letter inside was from the hotel, an automated invoice for 2 guests, itemized by name. His name. And hers. His hand trembled. This is wrong, he whispered, though even he didn't sound convinced. No, Ethan, I said. This is documentation. I walked back inside, collected my purse, and called over my shoulder, I'll be out most of the day. When I get back, we'll discuss next steps. Are you leaving me? He asked. Not yet, I said, pausing in the doorway. I want to be fair. But fairness requires truth. And truth is something I intend to verify thoroughly. I left him standing there with the invoice in his hands, the brass key on the counter, and the realization he'd never expected to face. He had assumed I would stay quiet. He had no idea what happens when I stop pretending not to see. It had been less than 24 hours since the certified envelope arrived, but Ethan already looked like someone living on borrowed time. His shoulders sagged when I walked back into the house that evening, the brass key still sitting exactly where I'd placed it on the counter. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Instead, I moved straight into a decisive scene. I took the hotel invoice from his hands and placed it atop the HOA violation pages. I need access to your phone, I said. Ethan blinked. My phone? You said you wanted to talk. This is the conversation. His hand hovered near his pocket like someone protecting a wound. Maya, that's invasive. I have private work information. And I have timestamped proof you lied about where you were, I said. So we can play the privacy game, or we can deal with the truth. He hesitated. For a moment, I saw him weighing his usual assumption, that I'd back down, that my discomfort with confrontation would protect him. But something in my stillness must have told him that version of me was gone. He handed me the phone. I didn't scroll for long. I didn't need to. I simply opened his message history with Mark, the supposed colleague he always used as a shield. The top message wasn't from Ethan. It was from the woman in the sea blue scarf. Same hotel next month? Same room? I booked early, use our usual cover. Ethan lunged forward. That's not what it looks like. I held up a hand. Do not finish that sentence. My phone buzzed before he could protest again. A call. Unknown number. I stepped away and answered it in the hallway. Is this Mrs. Carmichael? A voice asked. Yes. I'm calling from Ridgeway Apartments. You'd asked yesterday about public records tied to your property's ID? My pulse tightened. Yes, I did. Just letting you know the records you requested, guest logs from the last quarter, are ready. I can email them or you can pick up a hard copy. Hard copies can't mysteriously disappear. I'll come in person, I said. Thank you. When I returned to the kitchen, Ethan had his hands on his head. Maya, listen, he said. It was stupid. I messed up. It didn't mean anything. That's the thing, I said. It meant enough for you to lie 6 weeks in a row. I panicked, he insisted. I thought if I told you the truth, you'd leave. And now? He swallowed. Now I'm scared you will. I didn't answer. I walked upstairs, retrieved my work bag, and placed the tablet, the one with the 2 versions of the deed, beside him. Tonight, I'm going to my sister's, I said. Tomorrow morning, I'll meet with the HOA board. The HOA, he repeated, startled. Why? Maya, come on. They don't need to be involved in our marriage. Ethan, I said quietly, your problem is that you think this is only about our marriage. You live in a building governed by bylaws you violated. And fines are issued to the homeowner, you. His jaw snapped shut. Backfill came with a clarity he didn't expect me to have. Weeks ago, I'd noticed a strange charge on our joint card, $1.98 from a store downtown. Ethan mumbled something about needing work shoes. I believed him. But last week, when I cleaned out the trunk, the sea blue scarf still had a $198 tag. I remembered standing there, holding it in my hands, telling myself not to jump to conclusions. That people make stupid mistakes. That marriage is about trust. Now I saw how naive that was. Trust isn't blind, it's verified. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door, but Ethan followed me. Maya, he said, blocking the entryway. Please don't involve the HOA. We can fix this without dragging it into the neighborhood. You already dragged it there, I said. Multiple times. Overnight. He stepped back like I'd hit him. You want me to beg? He asked, voice trembling. No, I said. I want you to understand the difference between regret and consequence. I walked to my car, the cold air cutting the silence between us. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw him through the rearview mirror, standing on the porch, hands in his hair, watching the equilibrium of his life slip through his fingers. But the story didn't stop there. I stopped at the Ridgeway Apartments admin office, where a middle-aged clerk handed me a sealed envelope stamped with the building's insignia. These are the logs you wanted, she said. Quite a few entries for your property ID. My stomach tightened. Entries? Oh yes, she said. Your husband was listed as the primary visitor several times. And there's another name listed as an unregistered occupant. I kept my voice steady. Her name? The clerk checked. Dana Calder. Does that ring a bell? It rang loudly. Dana, the same woman who signed the invoice. The same one in the footage. The same one sending hotel room messages. I took the envelope carefully. Proof has weight when you hold it. Back in my car, I placed the brass key beside the logs. I let the 2 objects sit together, one symbolizing order, the other symbolizing disruption. And I recognized what I needed to do next. The HOA didn't just need the proof. The city's property compliance office did too. When I returned to my sister's house that night, I laid everything out on her dining table, the hotel footage screenshot, the invoice, the deed versions, the guest logs. My sister looked at me and whispered, "He really thought you'd never see this." He assumed, I said quietly, that I wouldn't fight for the truth. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He has no idea who he married. I exhaled for the first time that day. Tomorrow, Ethan would learn. It had been one night since I left Ethan standing on the porch. One night of hearing my sister pad softly around her house, trying not to disturb me. One night of staring at the brass key I'd placed on her coffee table, turning it between my fingers until dawn. And as I drove toward the HOA board office that morning, I realized something sharp and simple: Ethan hadn't betrayed me on a whim. He had built a system of lies, layered, edited, time-stamped, and trusted that I would never align the pieces. But I was done being his blind spot. When I arrived, the HOA board was already gathered in their small meeting room. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the winter sun squeezed through the blinds in thin, pale stripes. 3 board members sat behind the folding table, Mr. Leland, Mrs. Cortez, and a younger man I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Carmichael," Mr. Leland said. "You requested a review of guest residency clause 4B? "Yes," I said, placing the packet of logs and the printed bylaws on the table. "I'm filing a formal inquiry about unregistered overnight guests tied to my property ID." Mrs. Cortez scanned the top page. "These logs indicate repeated violations." "They do," I said. "Multiple nights. Multiple months." The younger man frowned at the timestamp entries. "And the visits weren't from you?" "No," I said. "They weren't. Scene backfill. 2 months ago, we'd received a warning notice, one Ethan intercepted. At the time, he told me it was nothing serious, just a generic mailer. Now, reviewing the HOA documents, I recognized the letter's format among the sample templates. He'd hidden the first violation. Back in the present, the board asked more questions, routine procedural ones. Who had access to the property? Did I consent to anyone staying overnight? Had I noticed unfamiliar vehicles or activity? My answers were short and precise. My husband. No. Yes. "Mrs. Carmichael," Mrs. Cortez said gently, "we will need to call him in to respond." "That's fine," I said. "But I want it on record that I am reporting this voluntarily before the next penalty cycle issues." The younger man nodded. "Documented. Thank you." As I left the office, I checked my phone. 4 missed calls from Ethan. 2 texts, "Please come home. We need to talk." And then, "I can explain the logs. Just hear me out." I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to my office on Elm Street, where Janelle was waiting with a single manila folder, thick, heavier than expected. "This is everything," she said. "The deed, the metadata, the email trail." I highlighted the inconsistencies. I opened the folder and saw what she meant. The edited deed version had a different creation timestamp than the original. Someone had removed that joint authorization clause, saved the edited copy, and placed it in our shared digital archive. "Did anyone else access this file?" I asked. "No. Our system logs show only you and him." "Thank you," I said. "Lock your lips on this." She nodded. "Always." I left with the folder under my arm, the brass key in my coat pocket, and a new thought forming like a current. Ethan hadn't just lied, he'd altered legal documentation to bypass me. Around noon, I drove back home for the next key scene. Ethan was already pacing the living room, his hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled. He stopped when I walked in. "Maya," he said, stepping toward me, "listen." "No," I said, setting my bag on the console. "You're going to listen." He froze. I took out the envelope of guest logs and placed it on the coffee table. "These," I said, "show you were at Ridgeway Apartments with an unregistered occupant, multiple times." He swallowed. "It wasn't like that. Dana was." I held up a hand. "I'm not interested in the narrative you've crafted. I'm interested in facts." He dragged a hand down his face. "I didn't mean for this to go so far." "But it did," I said. "Because you assumed I'd never check. You assumed your version of the truth would hold." He sat down heavily. "I messed up. But we can fix this." "Fix?" I repeated. "How?" "With therapy," he pleaded. "With honesty. I'll admit everything. I'll cut ties with Dana." I didn't sit. You can't cut ties with someone who appears on invoices, hotel logs, and residency records. You already tied yourself to her. He winced. I reached into my bag and pulled out the deed versions. I placed them beside the logs. His eyes widened. "Where did you get those?" "A better question," I said quietly, "is why you created an edited version of our deed." I didn't, it was nothing. Just a draft. A draft that removed my authorization rights, I said. And had a different metadata timestamp. He blinked rapidly. Maya, I swear. You falsified documentation, I said. That isn't marriage trouble. That's a legal issue. The color drained from his face. You wouldn't take this to court. That depends, I said, on how honest you are from this moment forward. Silence flooded the room. He stared at the documents lined up like dominoes: hotel footage, invoice, logs, edited deed. Then, quietly, he collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands. Maya, he said, voice cracking, I thought you'd never see any of this. I know, I said. That was your first mistake. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What's the next step? I'm not rushing, I said. I'm verifying. I collected my things calmly, my tablet, the logs, the real deed, and left. As I closed the door behind me, I didn't feel anger or grief. Just clarity. Ethan had built a structure of lies. Now he would learn what happens when the truth becomes structural too. It had been 3 days since the HOA meeting, 3 days since Ethan first realized the ground beneath him was no longer solid. 3 days of him calling, texting, hovering between apology and panic. And that morning, as I walked into the Ridgeway Municipal Building with the brass key cold in my pocket, I understood something with absolute clarity. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking verification. And verification, once started, does not stop to consider someone's feelings. I met with the city's property compliance officer, a tall woman named Arlene who spoke in clipped, precise sentences. Her office smelled faintly of old paper and winter air. She gestured for me to sit. You requested a review of your property's guest residency records, she said. Yes, I replied, placing the packet of Ridgeway logs on her desk. I need these authenticated. Arlene flipped through them slowly, her eyes narrowing at the repeated entries. This is not minimal, she murmured. Multiple visits. Patterned. And the unregistered occupant, this name matches a leasing complaint we received last month. I felt something inside me tighten. A complaint? Yes. She tapped the page. Someone by this name attempted to add herself to another unit's lease without proper authorization. It raised flags. Seen backfill. 2 weeks ago, Ethan came home irritated, muttering about a mix-up in the office building. He said someone had filed a false complaint and he had to waste 20 minutes clarifying paperwork. At the time, I barely registered it. Now I realized he'd been managing fallout from Dana's attempts to secure a quietly shared space. He hadn't been cleaning up her mistakes out of kindness. He'd been containing exposure. Returning to the present, Arlene continued, I'll run these logs through the city's verification system. We'll confirm the timestamps and visitor IDs. Once complete, you'll receive an official report. She paused. Do you expect a dispute? Yes, I said calmly. From my husband. Her expression softened, but her tone remained professional. We'll make sure the documentation holds. As I left her office, the brass key felt warm against my palm, a small reminder that order existed, even in chaos. My phone vibrated as soon as I stepped into the parking lot. Ethan. I let it ring twice before answering. Maya, he breathed, voice frayed, please meet me for lunch. Just talk to me. I'm losing my mind. When? Now. Anywhere you want. I chose a neutral spot, the Brookline Diner. Public enough to keep the conversation contained, quiet enough to hear every word. When I arrived, he was already there, fidgeting with the salt shaker, eyes darting to the door the moment I walked in. You came, he said softly. I'm here for clarity, not comfort. He swallowed and nodded. Okay. Fair. I sat across from him. A waitress poured water for both of us and left without comment. Ethan leaned forward. Maya. I know I've hurt you. I know I lied. I know I messed up in ways I can't undo. But I'm begging you, don't escalate this. Don't involve the HOA or the city. We can get ahead of this before it becomes formal. It's already formal, I said. And you made it that way long before I ever stepped into an office. His jaw tightened. You're going to destroy me. No, I said quietly. But the truth might. He flinched. I reached into my bag and placed a new document between us. This is the metadata report from my office server. It shows the exact timestamp when you edited the deed. His face went blank. Not guilty, empty. Like he had finally run out of explanations to rotate through. I didn't. I wasn't trying to cheat you, he whispered. I just wanted flexibility. Dana needed a place near the project site. It wasn't romantic, at first. It was convenience. At first, I repeated. So it became something else. He rubbed his forehead. I don't even know how it happened. You do, I said. You just don't want to say it out loud. The waitress approached, but Ethan waved her away. Maya, I'm asking you to consider us, he said. Our history. Our home. Everything we've built. No, I said, voice steady. Consider your decisions. He breathed shakily. What do you want from me? Truth, I said. Documentation. He blinked. Documentation? Affidavits, I said. A statement confirming your editing of the deed. A statement confirming the residency violations. And a statement about your relationship with her. His whole body recoiled. Maya, you're asking me to put my head in a noose. I'm asking you to acknowledge reality. I can't sign those. You will, I said, if you want any part of this to end cleanly. He stared at me, searching for the version of me who used to soften and compromise. She wasn't there. The emotional hit landed when I stayed silent. After several long seconds, he whispered, if I sign, what happens next? You move out temporarily, I said. You comply with the HOA penalties. And you follow all property rules until the inquiry is closed. He blinked rapidly. Move out? Maya. You created a shared space with someone else, I said. You can stay there. His lips parted, but no sound came out. A microscene unfolded as a family walked past our table, a father holding a toddler's hand, a mother balancing a diaper bag. They looked warm. Whole. Uncomplicated. Ethan watched them, and for the first time, I saw something besides guilt. Regret. Not because he lost me. Because he lost his version of me, the one who never questioned. He exhaled. I'll sign. I nodded, gathered my things, and stood. Good. I'll send you the documents tonight. As I walked out, he didn't follow. He stayed seated, staring at the table, shoulders curled inward. But the day wasn't done. That afternoon, an email arrived from Arlene at Property Compliance. The official report was attached. Everything was validated. Timestamps. Guest IDs. Residency entries. All legitimate. All verified. And one additional note at the bottom, flagged for further review by the city board due to repeated violations. I held the brass key in one hand, the report in the other. This wasn't the climax. This was the threshold. Ethan had agreed to sign the affidavits, but the consequences, those belonged to the city, to the HOA, to the truth itself. In that moment, I realized the part he feared most wasn't losing me. It was losing the version of the story he'd controlled for months. He was about to learn that when you build your life on assumptions, the collapse is loud. And public. It had been 1 week since the city authenticated the logs. 1 week since Ethan sat across from me in the diner, breaking under the weight of the truth he'd never intended me to uncover. 1 week since he agreed, quietly, trembling, to sign the affidavits that would cement everything in writing. And that morning, as I stood in our living room with the brass key warm in my palm, I knew the final scene wouldn't be dramatic. It would be procedural. documented. Inarguable. The knock on the door came precisely at 9. Ethan, pale and unshaven, opened it. 2 HOA board members, Mr. Leland and Mrs. Cortez, stepped inside, along with Arlene from the city's property compliance office. They had requested an in-person review to finalize the violation findings. Ethan had known they were coming. What he didn't know was that I'd prepared every piece of evidence in a clear, chronological folder sitting neatly on the table. Mr. and Mrs. Carmichael, Arlene said, nodding politely. Thank you for meeting with us. Ethan tried to smile, but it dissolved halfway. Of course. I want to clear everything up. We appreciate that, Mr. Leland replied. We'll be brief. The 4 of them settled around the dining table. I remained standing. I didn't want the power of height, I wanted clarity. A view of everything. Arlene opened the meeting. We're here to verify the submitted documentation tied to repeated unregistered guest stays at Ridgeway Apartments. We have the city logs, timestamp verification, and the occupancy complaint. Before we proceed, we require acknowledgement from both homeowners. Ethan's voice cracked. I didn't file anything. I don't know how these logs. Ethan, I said softly. Stop. Everyone turned toward me. I placed the folder on the table and opened it to the affidavits he'd reluctantly signed 2 nights earlier, statements confirming, 1, his relationship with Dana, 2, his residency violations, and 3, his unauthorized edits to our deed. His eyes flickered, pain, fear, shame, before settling into a defeated stillness. Mrs. Cortez scanned the first page and exhaled slowly. This is thorough. It had to be, I said. Seen backfill, 2 nights ago, he signed each page with shaking hands. He apologized between signatures, whispering fragments of guilt. I never meant to hurt you, I didn't think it would matter, I thought you'd never see it. I didn't respond then. I simply placed each affidavit in a protective sleeve and thanked him for cooperating. He cried afterward, not because the truth hurt, but because the consequences were finally real. Back to the present, Arlene examined the documents. These statements align with our findings. Given the repeated violations, the city will issue fines and formally flag the property. The HOA will determine additional action regarding common area privileges and membership compliance. Ethan's shoulders collapsed inward. How much are we talking? Mr. Leland read from a sheet. Initial penalties total $3,400. Additional fines may be applied pending the next review cycle. Ethan stared at the table as if numbers might rearrange themselves. Arlene slid the official report toward me. Mrs. Carmichael, thank you for bringing this forward with clear documentation. This process is significantly smoother when evidence is complete. I nodded once. Verification matters. When the officials left, closing the door softly behind them, Ethan sank onto the sofa like a man whose bones could no longer hold him upright. Maya, he whispered, is this the end? I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the hook near the door, lifted the brass key, and held it between us. This, I said, was the one thing you never touched. The one thing that stayed exactly where it belonged. He looked at the key like it was an indictment. I messed everything up. You did, I said. Not with the affair. Not with the lies. With the assumption. He frowned through the exhaustion. What assumption? That I would never check, I said. That I would never verify. That I would never read the documents you edited or question the timestamps you gave. He shut his eyes. I didn't think you'd do this. I know, I said. That's why we're here. For a long moment, there was only quiet. Then he said, What happens now? I sat across from him, setting the brass key gently on the coffee table. Now? You move out temporarily. Like we discussed. He lifted his head, face hollow. And after that? I don't know, I said honestly. Trust isn't rebuilt with apologies. It's rebuilt with actions I can verify. And that takes time. He nodded slowly, as though each movement hurt. I'll pack some things. Take what you need, I said. You'll have access to the apartment on Ridgeway. It seems you're already familiar with it. He flinched, but didn't argue. As he disappeared into the bedroom to pack, I looked around the living room, the table stacked with verified reports, the clean lines of the walls I'd repainted last spring, the brass key glinting under the morning light. When he returned with a small suitcase, he paused at the doorway. Do you hate me? He asked quietly. No, I said. But I don't trust you. And that's the part you broke. He swallowed hard, nodded once, and stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind him, a small sound, but decisive. I sat down at the table, gathered the reports into one tidy stack, and locked them in a drawer. Not out of pettiness. Out of record-keeping. Out of self-respect. Out of order. Out of truth. The brass key remained on the table, gleaming. A reminder that clarity is not cruel. It is exact. And for the first time in months, I felt something even stronger than relief. I felt steady.